What up, YouTube? This is your boy, Adam of Nola, and this is another video here on my channel, Skepticus. Today, I have a treat for you. We're diving into a video that I've come across called Atheism's Evil Moral Consequences. Ooh. This is by a channel called Sanctus. And yes, it can't be a surprise that it sounds suspiciously like Sanctimonious. It's not that I feel compelled to go out there and reply to everyone's video about atheism. Lord knows you could just sit there and do that all day long, and I don't know how much value it would be. But there is a point sometimes when you run across one of these videos, and it's not just inaccurate. It's not just that it's objectively bad. It's so bad that it's actually quite entertaining. It's a bit like watching the movie The Room. You don't watch The Room because it's quality cinema. It's quality cinema because it is so much the opposite of quality cinema that you can't help but watch it for high entertainment value. So I do feel compelled to dive into this because I do think it'll be somewhat entertaining. So come along on this ride with me as we watch and reply to atheism's evil moral consequences. Notice the first not so subtle suggestion here is that the consequences of atheism are the world burning. Yes, if some people don't believe in a God, that means that the world will burn.
When we look out into the modern world, we see a smorgasbord of conflicting moral systems. The leaders of nations cannot agree on what is the good, or essentially, what should everyone strive for. But what is the source of this division? Well, put simply, the source is that of atheism or secularism. Atheism is the denial or lack of belief.
So there are multiple world leaders and world governments that cannot agree on what is good. And the cause of that is atheism. So because all of the world's governments don't agree, what is the reason for this? It's because of atheists. We are the reason that your governments can't all get together and just agree and get along. Because you know what is the most cohesive, loving, and uniform body known on earth? It's religion. If you believe in God, if you are devout, if you are, in fact, very much into your religion and feel very deeply about it, that is a great recipe for ensuring that you are in peace and harmony with the rest of the world. Because we all know that the only thing keeping the world's leaders from being in perfect sync is that they are atheists. I'll also point out here that according to a quick Google search, there are an estimated 45,000 Christian denominations worldwide. Honestly, that feels like some AI nonsense. There are many, many denominations. 45,000 feels like something that came from an overly aggressive view of what is or is not a denomination. Something that I would trust a little more is that on Bart Ehrman's site, when it talks about Christian history, it has an article there that talks about a list of all 46 types of Christianity. That feels a bit more functional than this kind of made up idea of 45,000 different denominations. But even when we take it in that regard, you're talking about 46 different denominations of Christianity alone. And then, of course, we have all of the other religions around the world. And if you don't think that these religious ideas impact the decisions and the goals of political leaders, then you're just not really paying much attention. Now, are there atheist leaders? Sure. Are there countries like Japan, for example, where the impact of religion is far, far lower than it is in the West? Sure, there is. But the idea that these world leaders and these nations cannot agree on common goods because of atheism is such a ridiculous and unfounded statement that it just beggars credulity.
Atheism is the denial or lack of belief in the existence of God. Many atheists reject universal or objective morality and adopt a view of morality that is subjective.
Okay, so here comes just another big flat fallacy. This idea that many atheists adopt a view of morality that is subjective. He is taking a ridiculous stretch that does not follow. It's a non sequitur. What I mean by that is this. He's talking about the idea that many atheists reject the idea of objective morality, and that is true. Many atheists do. That doesn't mean that they're immoral, and that doesn't mean that their morality is subjective. You can still base something on objective standards without having a universal objective morality. You need to look no further than this than to look at secular humanism. Now, to be clear, secular humanism is not the morality of atheists, and all atheists are not secular humanists. All secular humanists are not atheists, but secular humanism provides an excellent framework to show how you can have objective values for your morality without believing in some universal objective standard for your morality. In other words, when you say that you want to have a universal objective standard for your morality, usually what one is implying when they say that is that their objective standard is God. But that doesn't mean that you can't come to reasoned and logical, and in most cases, obvious examples of what is moral and what is not moral without retreating to this toddler mentality of what does God tell us to do.
Subjective morality can be defined as a system of morality that is based on the subject or the individual and his preferences, feelings, culture, etc.
So he's going to go down this subjective morality hole because that is the straw man that he's going to build up as tall as he can before he lights it on fire. The sad part is that it's a complete and sad straw man because, again, there is no reason why being an atheist means that you have to have subjective morality.
To give an example, those who hold to subjective morality may value sexual freedom, or they may not value it. It is dependent on the individual's preferences. David Hume explains it best when he states, "So that when you pronounce any action or character to be vicious, you mean nothing but that from the constitution of your nature you have a feeling or sentiment of blame from the contemplation of it. Vice and virtue, therefore, may be compared to sounds, colors, heat, and cold, which, according to modern philosophy, are not qualities in subjects, but perceptions in the mind."
Yeah, that's really lovely, except it has nothing to do with the typical idea of morality because it is an obvious and, quite frankly, simple conclusion to come to realize that when you steal, it violates the property rights of others, it threatens the safety of our society, and ultimately it can threaten the foundations of our society entirely if everyone were allowed to steal whatever, whenever they want. That is not based on some subjective idea of who likes this color better or what makes me feel good. That is creating an objective standard, even though I don't believe in a universal objective standard that has to come down from your magic sky daddy.
This is contrasted with objective or universal morality, which can be defined as a system of morality that is applicable to any person, culture, or society. To give an example, a person who holds to objective morality may uphold murder to always be wrong in every situation.
This is a common trope that theists trot out whenever they want to attack the idea of morality in atheism. And they talk about how, well, if you have universal objective morality, then murder would be wrong in every situation. Murder is wrong in every situation, regardless of what framework you choose for morality, because the definition of murder is that it is an unjustified killing. Now, if you want to talk about whether killing is wrong at all times, that's an entirely different conversation. But when you use the word murder, the term itself implies by its very definition that murder is wrong. Because if you've just killed someone, let's say you've killed an enemy combatant in a war, that has never been considered to be murder. And it's not murder. It is a killing, yes, but it's not murder. When someone attacks you in your home and you pick up a knife and you defend yourself and you end up killing them, that is not murder. That is killing. So this idea that you want to throw up another ridiculous misdirection here with this term of murder just defines the fact that you are not trying to play fair and you don't necessarily have the intellectual capacity to even engage in this argument.
Generally, those who uphold objective morality believe in God, and God being that being which gives this system of morality to mankind, or put differently, constructs reality and human nature, such that they ought to act out or achieve certain goods and virtues and avoid those things which lack good or are evil.
Again, you don't have to be Christian or theist or even deist to want to achieve certain goods and virtues and avoid those things which lack good. I'm sorry to break it to you, O Sanctus, but the fact is that this is not the exclusive domain of religious or Christian people.
Of course, then, a lack of belief in God's existence generally leads to a lack of belief in objective or universal morality. But then there becomes an issue with the practicality of this belief. For if we grant that subjective morality is true,
again, you're beating a strong man to death here. This idea that if we grant that subjective morality is true, nobody ever held that up aside from you as an idea of that's what atheism is.
and objective morality isn't, the many absurd consequences result from this view. Thus today we shall drive atheism to its logical conclusions.
Its logical conclusion, even though you haven't managed to say anything that's really logical up to this point. But go ahead with your logical conclusions.
Regarding morality, purpose, and value. What then are these absurd consequences that result from atheism's subjective morality?
If atheists across the board had this idea that you have flaunted of subjective morality, I'm sure that it would lead to absurd consequences. Unfortunately, you are just beating the hell out of your lame little straw man.
Well, for one, it is impossible to tell another person that they have done something wrong.
So even if you are subjectively moral, there is no reason why it would be impossible to tell someone that they've done something wrong. Even under your lame-ass premise of this idea of subjective morality, if that was what atheists even clung to, you could absolutely tell someone that they've done something wrong. Because even if something is subjective, you would still have your own subjective viewpoint. But you don't seem to understand how subjectivity works. But that's okay, because hey, it's just your straw man anyway. Who really needs to understand it that well if you're just going to flog the hell out of it for your own theological ends?
For they are merely acting out their preferences, and by imposing your own preferences on another person, you attempt to make your preferences of morality the standard that all should follow.
Again, there is nothing about atheism that implies that all you are doing is just acting out your own preferences. There's nothing about atheism that implies that that's all atheists think are good. Going back again to my example of secular humanism, there are plenty of highly moral ideas that atheists around the world hold. And it's not because it's just what feels good. It's not just what's subjective to them. It is very easy, if you have a moral compass that is more advanced than that of a 5-year-old, to understand that those things which undermine society and undermine the common good and undermine the rights and the freedom of other people can be seen as being bad. And you don't have to be a theist to understand that. In fact, I would argue that many atheists understand that far better than theists ever will. Because I've never heard an atheist sit around and try to create a moral defense of slavery or genocide or any of the other crap that the Christians read from their Bible.
Thus, the most vilest of immoral actions become licit and acceptable. For as was stated, one can't really tell another person that rationally their actions are wrong by appealing to some standard.
You can if the standard is the good of all people. You can if the standard is common decency and respect for others and respect for human rights and dignity, which is something that you can't get to if you're rationalizing things like slavery and genocide.
If the atheist is to be consistent with their position, this necessarily is the result.
No, that is the inconsistent and irrational response that you are jumping to so that you can continue to flog the hell out of your straw man.
Interestingly, many atheists opt out for a system of utilitarianism, which attempts to have a society constructed on the idea of maximizing pleasure.
He just said that many atheists opt out for a system of utilitarianism. And then he says that that's having a society constructed on the idea of maximizing pleasure. How in the hell does your 2-year-old brain equate utilitarianism with maximizing pleasure? Those two concepts have virtually nothing in common. There are some things that could bring you pleasure that are also utilitarian in nature. There are some things that are utilitarian in nature that would probably bring you little or no pleasure at all. The idea that you have just in one sentence tried to equate utilitarianism and maximizing pleasure means that you apparently should go back to a dictionary and just look up utilitarianism, because it has nothing to do with this.
And getting rid of that which is opposed to pleasure. Now, there are a couple issues with this system.
Yeah, the issues are that you don't understand what you're talking about, but you're still rolling your video.
For one, which pleasures that ought to be maximized are not necessarily agreed upon by all people. For what one person prefers or finds pleasure in, another may detest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense if we were actually trying to create a moral system based on everyone's pleasure, which I have never seen any other atheist try to do.
In which case the majority rules on what is pleasurable. And we find a similar situation in 18th century America. For at one point, the majority desired slavery as an institution that helps to maximize the overall amount of people in the society. But of course, the issue with this view is that every human being has dignity and value. But in atheism's subjective worldview, they really have no basis for opposing slavery, for morality is merely what one prefers.
Oh my gosh, this sad dude just tried to take credit for opposing slavery as somehow being a Christian idea and atheism being against this. Who do you think those slavers were? What religion do you think those slavers were following? Who were the primary slave owners in America in the 18th century? Were they Hindus? Were they Muslims? Were they atheists? Do I really need to answer this question for you? But apparently you think that slavery was caused by everyone just doing what they wanted to do, even though it is the Bible that explicitly endorses slavery. This is dangerously myopic and outright morally disgusting. And yet you're preaching to others about what would happen if there were the evil moral consequences of atheism running around.
Another issue with this worldview is it amounts to saying that the purpose of life is self-pleasure.
This channel, Sanctus, seems to have a complete inability to distinguish atheism from hedonism. While it is possible to be an atheist and a hedonist, of course, many atheists are not hedonists, and many hedonists are not atheists. All of this track that you're taking about self-pleasure seems to just be a poorly reasoned argument against hedonism. And I'm not sitting here to defend hedonism, but I'm just saying that if you're going to do a video about atheism, at least make it about atheism and not about hedonism. But in order to do that, I guess you'd have to learn what atheism really is.
But atheism not only rejects universal morality, but it rejects universal purpose.
Again, there is nothing about atheism that by definition rejects universal morality. I will admit that there are many atheists who do reject universal morality, because ultimately, every time you say there should be universal morality, the idea is then who is setting that morality? Of course, theists will say, oh, God sets it. But that then leads to two very sticky problems. The first horrible problem is that, for example, with Christianity, your Bible is full of disgusting amoral acts that were committed by or commanded by your God. Universal morality, then there is no basis by which we can actually reject things like slavery or genocide, because he absolutely endorses and commits those same things. The second problem with this sanctified idea that Christians have about universal morality is that they think it's all fine and good to say, well, if God says it, it's good. And if it's not from God, then it's bad. But what they don't realize is that in a sick sort of way, this makes them some of the most horrific moral relativists on earth, because all it takes is one charismatic religious leader standing up and saying, this is what God told me to do. And suddenly you are full bore behind whatever it is that he tells you to do. Because once someone has, in your mind, credibly invoked the name of God, you will follow them to do anything and everything that they command you to. because you don't really have a universal moral standard. You don't have any basis for where your morals are. The only basis that you have is that this magic person in your ancient book said it, so you hold it to be true, which on its surface might be workable, except the fact that anyone can tell you that they sat down last night and prayed or had a dream or had a vision, and this now is what God told you to do next. And once you reach that point, it doesn't matter if the commands coming from that person imply genocide, if they imply war, if they will create sadness and death and destruction amongst the rest of the people. As long as you believe that the command came from God, you'll do damn near anything. And that's something that most atheists will not do.
Every person's purpose then is subjective. For one person may not care to maximize pleasure.
You're right. Most atheists don't care to maximize pleasure.
They could be a depressed or pessimistic person who does not care or value these things. Now, going back to subjective morality and atheism,
because you're going to keep flogging that damn straw man as hard as you can.
While also applying this idea of subjective purpose, we find a very sad issue. If there is no universal purpose, then we are left to create our own purpose. But what if we don't? As was stated earlier, what if the person is pessimistic about reality, and they can't find any driving factor or motivation to get out of bed, or to even live?
Yes, because Lord knows there aren't any Christians out there who are depressed, because Christianity cures depression. If it weren't for atheism, there would be no pharmaceutical industry supporting antidepressant drugs like Zoloft, because we wouldn't need them. You just have Jeebus, and that would make you happy. Because apparently, Christians never get depressed.
And we find many examples of these persons in real life who suffer in this way, for this is not merely a hypothetical. Well, under the atheistic worldview that rejects universal purpose, there is really nothing that can be objectively appealed to in order to help this person. For what if this person doesn't care for any of the potential subjective and self-purpose ideas you offer him?
So apparently, the cure for finding any of these people, for finding anyone who's clinically depressed, is to pray with them and tell them about Jeebus.
And further, under the atheistic worldview, does his life...
I just have to point out here, this atheistic worldview, this comes up again and again and again. And admittedly, it's not just this video. Atheists do not have a world view. Atheism means I don't believe in your magic sky daddy candy god. That is all it means. The plethora of worldviews that exist amongst atheists is as varied as the number of atheists in the world. Now, you can try to attribute certain mindsets or certain beliefs that are more common in atheists and less common in theists. But the idea that you even talk about an atheistic worldview means that you don't actually understand what atheism is. And if you can't understand the basic meaning of the term itself, maybe you should think about that before you start trying to publicize videos teaching everyone about this atheistic worldview and its evil moral consequences, because you don't seem to understand basic terminology.
Even objectively matter anyway, if there is no such thing as objective value and meaning? Unfortunately, in atheism, the answer is no.
Again, I want to point out here that he plays so fast and so free with objective morality, objective truth, objective meaning. You can't just slap the word objective in front of those phrases and then assume that you can use them interchangeably. They are not the same thing.
For it is merely subjective, for values are merely one's preferences. Thus, atheism, if driven to its logical conclusion, leads to despair, destruction, and meaninglessness.
Yes, why don't we have some demons flying around too? Because if there were more atheists, then every city in the world would be burning. You know, like Tokyo. Oh wait, that's not right. There are large parts of the world where atheism or agnosticism are much bigger percentages of the population. And those places, despite your cheesy little graphic, are not on fire.
As was stated, this on its own doesn't disprove atheism being true. but it shows the reality of atheism's evil moral consequences.
So, think about what he just said. This doesn't disprove the idea that atheism is true, but then he wants to talk about atheism's evil moral consequences. So, in other words, I guess even if atheism is true and your God doesn't exist, we should just continue to be religious, because otherwise it would lead to horrible moral consequences if we admitted the simple fact that the God doesn't exist. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you your God doesn't exist. I'm telling you the logical conclusion of the statement that he just made,
which the majority of atheists are completely blind to. Just think of how society will collapse over time, since secularism has infected world governments as well.
Yes, like Japan. You see how those world governments have fallen and crumbled.
But under atheism, none of this truly matters, for nothing matters in atheism.
Yes, because an atheist doesn't care if everything just goes up in flames. In fact, every day I go get another big box of matches just to see if I can watch the world burn, because I don't care. I'm an atheist. What do I care if everything blows up tomorrow? I'm an atheist, dude. Yeah, atheists don't care about any of that.
As Pope Pius XII writes in his encyclical Summi Pontificatus, before all else, it is certain that the radical and ultimate cause of the evils which we deplore in modern society is the denial and rejection of a universal norm of morality, as well for individual and social life as for international relations.
Notice this quote has nothing to do with atheism, despite your sad little attempts to connect it. I definitely did not enjoy the video, although in a sick sort of way I did, because again, like watching one of those Mystery Science Theater 3000 movies, it's so bad that it's actually pretty good. I do think that maybe in the future we should start licensing who can actually make these videos, because you don't seem to have any command of the subject whatsoever. But you know what? Everyone can make videos and post them on YouTube anyway. And in the end, it's kind of entertaining. So thank you for joining me here today on my channel, Skepticus, not Sanctus, but Skepticus. I hope you've enjoyed the drivel that was part of this video. And until next time, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.